I'm Rory Davies, Artistic and Executive Director here at the Harlow Playhouse, and I'm here today to chat with Susie around International Women's Day and a little bit more about her show. Harlow Playhouse were the commissioning producers of the show, and I'll let Susie introduce herself.
So I'm Susie and I am the writer of my one-woman show, Priscilla, Queen of the Disaster, and now the brand It's OK Susie.
Amazing. Thanks, Susie. I've got some questions here that I'm going to ask you.
Fab.
Tell us a little bit more about It's OK Susie and how it relates to International Women's Week as a brand.
So It's OK Susie started because of the show that I've written, Priscilla. And it wasn't really an intentional thing at the beginning. It was more to just do a show and see what happened there. But what we found was that after the show and when we'd performed it and taken it to other areas as well as here, people wanted to stay and chat. And in doing that and sharing our stories, we sort of created a connection, and that became a really, really powerful thing with women sharing their stories of motherhood and parenting and relationships. So, yeah, it's been about encouraging people to share their stories and empowering them to make little changes in their life too. So, yeah, I think it coincides nicely.
Was it nerve-wracking taking it to the first venue outside of your comfort audience?
Yes, for many reasons. The first one is that you have a lot of support here, and so I know whatever I do coming out, it's going to be like appreciated and understood. But taking it elsewhere, especially in the format that the show is, being like a one-woman show, and it's not particularly like a drama piece, it's more of like a comedy and a storytelling piece. And I know that format can be slightly different to a theatre audience, but that's what kind of makes it kind of unique as well. So yeah, for many reasons it was difficult, but also like pushing myself to do that has been really like enriching as well. So yeah.
Thanks, Susie. So tell us, Susie, how do you embrace equity?
So my understanding of embracing equity is my contribution or our contribution as a brand towards fairness and inclusion and an equal kind of, culture. And I think our contribution is in connecting women in particular, but parents as well. And I think in today's society, it can be a very, in terms of families and raising families, it can be very individualistic kind of structures, and people are just doing their own things, and that can lead to sort of judgments on other parents and snapshots of what you think's the right decision and competitiveness and who can do the best this and all of those things. And I think the show, in sharing my story and also with the blogs that accompany it and stuff, and being open about those things, has enabled other people to do that as well. So for me, I just sort of think that's ground level stuff. That's ground zero in terms of if we can get women particularly, but just people, to instead of judging each other and criticizing each other, to listen, be vulnerable, share their stories, connect, and then raise families in a more community-based way with support and love, that's sort of ground level up. And then from that point onwards, they can start empowering other people in their lives and in their families and in their communities, and that essentially leads to more inclusion. So yeah, I think in that way, really.
Do you feel there was a pressure as a parent to bring up your children in a way that was almost decided for you before
definitely.
You actually went on that journey as a parent?
Yeah, because you don't know what you're doing. You really don't know what you're doing. And you can read all the books and all the blogs and buy all the stuff and think you know what you're doing and think you have a grasp on it. Because I come from quite a big family as well with lots of children about. But until you're in that position, you don't really know, and you think you're going to do certain things. And that's kind of what the show focuses on, is looking at the expectation, which is usually a heavily curated version that we see online, versus the very messy, guilt-ridden, disastrous version that it actually is. And then I think that's the balance that we have to kind of find, is knowing that letting go of perfection isn't just an idea. It's imperative for your well-being, but as well as your children, that it doesn't exist. And once we do that and we start sharing those stories and we're allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and let go of those ideas of what you thought it should be, you can embrace the actual moment of, and that's actually where the colour is in parenting. It's in those bits in between where nothing went according to plan. And I'm not the parent I thought I was going to be, because my mum's very She's very natural at it, and she just takes it all in her stride. And I didn't feel like I took to it like a duck to water. It took me a while to get into the groove of it. And even now I'm learning. I still don't know what I'm doing. Spoiler, I've got no clue. Got no tips for you. Still don't know.
So Susie, why is celebrating International Women's Week important to you?
Because I do think taking the time to look at the role that women have these days is really, really important. Because I know that, like, I'm so incredibly privileged to have, like, to live at a time where tons of people before me fought to have equal rights, or as equal as they are at the moment, and ensure that, you know, we can carry on with our careers after we've had children and all of those things, and we can kind of have it all, that kind of thing. And I know I'm privileged with that, but I also know that trying to have it all is really, really difficult. And the only way that we're going to create any change in those sort of expected structures and looking at those workloads for people and looking at what people's lives look like is by highlighting women and parents and mothers and saying, do you know what, so grateful for what's happened, but, you know, something's got to give. There is no having it all. And how can we all support each other? And I genuinely think that we can support each other if we just tell stories. And I found that with, like, the show, in, like, telling my story, other people will come up to me and be like, I didn't know that I was allowed to say that. But actually, we're not going to create any change until we do. And I think that week in particular allows women to do that. So I think it's really important.
I think as well, we should definitely be championing women like yourself that have been able to have the ability to write your own show and really demonstrate that you can still be a parent and be involved in the performing arts and still have your own show and still be able to tour the UK and do those really important things. Yeah,
I mean, like, and also there's kind of like a little bit of, well, like, guilt and shame attached to it as well, because that's a little bit like the stigma as well of this working parent, that, like, you never quite feel like you're getting any of it right. And the spoiler alert of that is that you're never going to get it all right. So I know that when I'm doing the show and I'm doing this stuff, that I feel really enriched by it, and that in turn is like pouring into my own cup, and that makes me a better human, it makes me a better mum, makes me a better parent, all of those things, better family member, all of those things. But it doesn't take away the tough part of it, which is I didn't get to pick up my kids today. You know, that kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy that break sometimes, I'm not going to lie. But there are some things that I miss out on that. And then you've got, getting that balance is everyone's kind of challenge. But, like, talking about it, I think, allows us all to let go of that guilt a bit, which is important.
Thank you, Susie. So, Susie, tell us a little bit more about Priscilla, Queen of the Disaster, and how it celebrates women and embraces equity.
So, Priscilla is a story about the survival of the early years of motherhood. And in sharing that, it's enabling other people to sort of address what that significant change in their life was like. And obviously there are some important things that we address here, like our relationships with ourselves and our identity, but also with other people. It's my journey into single parenting. It's all of those things. And it looks at family structures and how there are so many different family structures, like, in society these days, but actually we only really shine a light on the nuclear family unit, and how there can be sort of some, you know, shame or at least a stigma attached to single parenting and the journey that it took you to get there, and some assumptions that come around that as well. But also being able to laugh at those stories and knowing that my story isn't the one that I expected to be telling, but it is the one that I am telling. So it's a story of, like, survival and resilience. And I know that even though that is my story and that might be specific to me, that everyone's going to have their version of it. No one's getting out of here unscathed, and if it hasn't happened to you yet, it's coming. Apology, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. But there is some part of our story that's going to crack you wide open, and you're going to have to pick yourself up again afterwards. And knowing that, like, 90% of single parents are women is such an important thing to recognise, because it's obviously something which is, like, such a huge part of that community, is that, you know, trying to juggle it all and being a woman and having that gender pay gap and trying to put those, like, all of that stuff and balancing all of that together. I think it's really important that we talk about single parents, because tons of them are women and we're all just kind of out there doing it, and things do need to change. And the only way that we're going to change is by telling our stories. So, yeah, like I said, I think we're sort of conditioned to think that we should tell this perfect story about how it all worked out and there is this happy ending and we're going to get there. But actually it's in it all sort of falling apart and being able to laugh at that and pick yourself up again that shows that, like, you're not alone, And I think that's the main takeaway that I want to get for like these women who are out there doing it, is they're not alone, and they are allowed to laugh at the ridiculousness of it and also be successful and powerful. And it doesn't make you a failure. It makes you really, really powerful, and it makes you someone that I personally admire.
Thanks, Susie. So, Susie, obviously we're here talking for International Women's Week, and you mentioned quite a lot in the last bit about empowering the women to tell their stories. Obviously, there's a lot of men that are bringing up in lone family situations as well. Would you say that they can relate to the show, or just give me a bit around that?
Yeah, 100%. I do think so, because I don't think there's anything that's like gender specific about this. I just know that, like, I know there are single dads out there, and I've spoken to them, and I've known some of them that have come and watched the show, and it isn't exclusive to women or any gender. The reason why I say it speaks to them is because, like, the statistics say 90% of them are. But for me, there isn't a real difference. And actually, I do know that there is a slight difference in the stigma attached. I do know that personally, simply because if you are a single mother, it's kind of more the norm. But that doesn't mean the struggle's any different. I would say the only difference was stigma, but actually the reality of it, what you live day in and day out, and the expectation of you, and the workload, and the isolation of it as well, is exactly the same. And I'd love if, you know, single parents who were dads or whatever, they came to see it and maybe felt seen and heard, because I think that's what everybody wants in life, really, is to be able to be seen and heard and validated and included. So it's not gender specific at all, and I would say they would get something out of it.
So, who is Priscilla, Queen of the Disaster for?
So, Priscilla is, like I kind of touched on before, it's obviously for mothers and parents, but also just for anybody that's been through something, that wants to, like, I realised very early on that, like, my story is quite a specific story, and I was quite young when it did kind of happen to me, but I realised I had a choice, that I could either, like, be bitter about this or kind of grow from it. And I think that's a fight or a battle everybody is going to have to take on in one part of their life. And I think the show is good in highlighting the humour throughout all of those things, but also the reality of finding yourself on the kitchen floor, not knowing if you're going to be able to get up again, and then getting up again. And that's not a unique story. So I think anybody that, you know, wants to know how that went down for me.
Thank you. So obviously you're sat here at Harlow Playhouse in Theatre 2, where the show very first premiered and opened.
Yeah.
So tell us, where else are you going?
We're going all over the place. So I know that we're going to Wales, and we're going to Aylesbury again. We went there last year, but it went down really well, so we're going back. And we're going to Brixham, all over the place. So all the dates are on my website, which is itsokaysusie.com.
Fantastic, thank you so
I'm
much.
back to the Playhouse next year, but hopefully with something a little bit different.
And a sort of newer version.
Yes, yeah, where we are now.
Thank you, Susie. So how can people book?
So go to the website, itsokaysusie.com, and under the theatre page, all of the dates are there, and you can get your tickets through that.
I think everyone should see it.
Thank you, Rory, thank you.
Big question for you, Susie. What women inspire you and why?
Okay, so the women that inspire me are strong, powerful women who tell their story through comedy and are not afraid to, like, truth tellers kind of thing. So the Michaela Cole, I May Destroy You, that was a game changer, so incredible. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Hannah Gadsby, Chelsea Handler, Jade Adams, all of those people inspire me, because they're showing up in, I think, in a world where they're shocked that women are telling their stories, but actually in telling their stories, we've all felt really empowered and seen, and I think that's so incredible. And to do that through comedy is just, I think, genius. But also, like, the women in my life, like my friends and my family, and like I grew up with, like, women. My mum and my two sisters, I call them a coven. They don't like it, but here we are. And my friends as well are all strong women who manage to show up in the world powerfully, but with this, like, kindness and empathy and compassion for other people, and getting that balance is incredible. So yeah, anybody like that, really.
Thank you, Susie. And my last question for you, what message would you like to leave with women and allies that are listening?
To share your story. So I think sometimes we think that, or we worry about how we're going to be perceived if we share the truth of our own stories, but actually it's the most connecting thing ever, and that there is no shame that's attached to any of that. It's just the most powerful thing in the entire world. And also in turn listening to other people's stories and connecting with them in a way that you can't do in any other way than through that, because I've never regretted it, sharing any of my story. I mean, I know I'm a bit of an oversharer, I'm not going to lie, but it's just meant that it's created this whole community of people who just feel less alone. And I do too, because telling really vulnerable parts of your life and parts of your story is a difficult thing to do, even if you are an oversharer. But standing up there and have people maybe just sigh, or I can hear them cry, or I can hear them laugh so hard because they too, you know, had the same experience or something similar, there's no feeling like it. And I just want everyone to experience that.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you so much for sharing your story through your show, but also spending time talking to us today. And for one last time, tell people how they can find out about you and your show.
So it's itsokaysusie.com.
Thanks, Susie.
Thanks, Rory.